He erased his face from every photograph. Why did he wait for each child? This is the story of John List.
For nearly a month, the lights inside the 19-room Victorian mansion burned day and night. Every window was shut tight against the New Jersey winter. And from the sidewalk, neighbors could hear classical music playing from a public address system, drifting through the cold December air.
A month is a long time for a house to sit like that. Didn't anyone check on the family?
People tried. The List family had seemingly vanished. Their mail deliveries had been stopped. The children had been pulled from school. Their teachers told they were visiting a sick relative in North Carolina. But by December 7, 1971, a strange odor began to seep from the property. Police finally forced their way through an unlocked basement window.
What did they find when they got inside?
The house was freezing. The thermostat had been turned down as low as it would go. The classical music was blaring. And in the grand ballroom, carefully laid out on sleeping bags, investigators found the bodies of Helen List and her 3 teenage children. Upstairs, in a third-floor apartment, they found the body of an 85-year-old woman named Alma.
Wait, if the entire family was in the house, who arranged the sleeping bags? And who stopped the mail?
That was the detail that turned a horrific discovery into a national mystery. The father, John List, was missing. But before he vanished, he had systematically walked through the massive home and cut his own face out of every single photograph.
He erased his own identity before leaving the house.
He did. To understand the chilling precision of this crime, you have to understand the community of Westfield, New Jersey in 1971. It was an affluent, quiet suburb. The kind of place where success was measured by the size of your home and the visibility of your faith. And John List appeared to have both. He was a 46-year-old certified public accountant, a Sunday school teacher, and a devoutly religious man.
He sounds entirely conventional. Like the definition of an average, respectable suburban father.
On paper, he was. He moved his family into Breeze Knoll, a sprawling mansion with a ballroom and Tiffany skylights. His wife, Helen, was known as a private woman, though neighbors sometimes noticed she seemed unwell. They had 3 children. Patricia was 16 and deeply involved in drama. John Jr. was 15 and played soccer. Frederick was 13.
Was there any sign of trouble? Because people do not just wake up and annihilate their families without a fracture forming somewhere first.
The fractures were everywhere, but they were hidden behind closed doors. John List had lost his job at a bank in Jersey City. But his pride, and his rigid belief in his role as the provider, prevented him from telling anyone. For months, he dressed in a suit every morning, took the train to the city, and spent his days sitting in the train station reading newspapers.
He was pretending to work while his family continued spending money on a 19-room mansion?
Yes. He began secretly skimming money from his mother's bank accounts just to pay the mortgage. But financial ruin was not his only pressure. Helen was secretly suffering from tertiary syphilis, contracted from her first husband, which she had hidden from John for years. It caused her physical decline and pushed her toward heavy drinking. John was also deeply paranoid about the changing culture of the 1970s. He believed his daughter Patricia was pulling away from their strict church teachings.
So you have a man defined by control, facing complete financial and moral collapse, with no way to maintain the image he built.
That collapse culminated on Tuesday, November 9, 1971. The day began exactly like any other. The children ate breakfast and left for school. John List watched them walk out the door. Once the house was quiet, he went to his car and retrieved 2 weapons, a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and a .22 caliber revolver.
He already had the guns loaded and ready? This was not a sudden break.
It was entirely premeditated. He walked back into the house and shot his wife, Helen, in the back of the head while she was drinking coffee in the kitchen. Then, he walked up the stairs to the 3rd-floor apartment, where his 85-year-old mother, Alma, was eating breakfast. He shot her once above the left eye.
Hold on. He killed his wife and his mother, but the children were still at school. What did he do for the rest of the day?
This is where the timeline becomes deeply disturbing. John List did not flee. He dragged his wife's body into the ballroom and laid her on a sleeping bag. His mother was too heavy to carry, so he left her in the attic. Then, he carefully cleaned up the blood in the kitchen. He made himself lunch. He then drove to his bank to close out his mother's bank accounts, cashing her savings bonds.
He went to the bank after murdering 2 people in his home? Did anyone at the bank notice anything off about his behavior?
According to the tellers, he was perfectly calm. polite, as always. After the bank, he drove back to the mansion. At 2:30 p.m., his daughter Patricia came home from school. John shot her in the jaw and the head. He dragged her body into the ballroom and placed her next to her mother. An hour later, his youngest son Frederick arrived. John shot him in the head and laid him on another sleeping bag.
He just waited in the house, killing them one by one as they walked through the door.
Yes, but his oldest son, John Jr., had a soccer game after school. So John List drove to the high school. He stood on the sidelines, watched his son play the game, and then drove him home. As soon as they entered the house, John Jr. realized something was wrong. He fought back. He was shot 10 times.
That is an unbelievable level of detachment. He watched his son play a game knowing exactly what he was about to do to him.
The detachment continued into the evening. After laying John Jr. in the ballroom, List sat at his desk and wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor. In it, he explained that he had killed his family to save their souls. He wrote that the world was becoming too sinful and that poverty would drive them away from God. By killing them, he claimed he was ensuring they would go to heaven.
He framed a mass execution as an act of religious salvation?
That was his justification. He then spent the night in the house with the bodies. The next morning, he made phone calls. He stopped the milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries. He called the children's schools to say they would be out of town. He turned down the thermostat to slow decomposition. He turned on the public address system, set a classical radio station to play continuously, and cut his face out of every family photograph in the house. Then, he drove to John F. Kennedy International Airport, parked his car, and vanished.
But how do you find someone when you do not even know what he looks like? He destroyed the photographs. Did they have any images of him at all?
They had a few older photographs from distant relatives in church archives, but List had successfully delayed his identification. By the time police found the bodies on December 7th, he had a 28-day head start. The FBI quickly joined the investigation. They tracked his car to the airport, but there was no record of him boarding a flight under his own name. He had taken his mother's cash, giving him the resources to start over.
So the trail was entirely cold from the beginning.
Months turned into years. The FBI chased leads across the country, but List was a quiet accountant. He did not have a criminal record. He did not leave a trail. In 1972, the Breeze Knoll mansion suspiciously burned to the ground, destroying the original crime scene.
So the physical evidence was literally reduced to ashes. How long did the police search for him?
The search lasted 18 years. Most fugitive cases from that era faded away, but the sheer methodical cruelty of the crime kept investigators obsessed. In 1989, a massive breakthrough occurred, driven by a new approach to forensic psychology and media. The television show America's Most Wanted had recently premiered, and investigators wanted to feature John List.
If he had been on the run for 18 years, an old photo from 1971 would not be enough. He would be in his 60s by then.
Exactly, so the FBI brought in a forensic sculptor named Frank Bender and a criminal profiler named Richard Walter. They needed to age progress John List, but they did not just age his physical features, they aged his psychology.
What does that mean? How do you sculpt a suspect's psychology?
Richard Walter analyzed List's rigid, conservative personality. He predicted that List would not have changed his lifestyle. He would not be hiding out in a remote cabin. He would still be an accountant, he would still be wearing conservative suits, he would still be attending church, and he would be wearing a specific style of thick, dark-rimmed glasses. Bender used these profile details to create a clay bust of what List should look like in 1989.
So they presented a theory of the man, not just a physical sketch. Did the broadcast actually work?
On May 21, 1989, the episode aired to over 22 million viewers. The bust was shown on screen. Almost immediately, a woman in Richmond, Virginia, called the tip line. She said the bust looked exactly like her neighbor, a church-going accountant named Robert Peter Clark.
He used the name Robert Peter Clark? Did he actually build the exact same life?
He did. He had moved to Denver, then Virginia. He had resumed working as an accountant. He had joined a Lutheran church. And incredibly, he had remarried. When the FBI went to his house in Richmond, they found a man who looked identical to the clay bust, right down to the thick glasses.
When they arrested him, did he admit who he was? Or did he try to maintain the lie?
He maintained the lie for months, even after his arrest. He insisted his name was Robert Peter Clark. It was only when investigators matched his fingerprints to military records from World War II that he finally admitted he was John List.
After 18 years of pretending to be someone else, he is finally dragged into a courtroom. How on earth does a defense attorney build a case for a man who confessed in a letter left at the crime scene?
The trial began in April 1990 in New Jersey. The defense did not deny that List killed his family. Instead, they relied on a strategy of diminished capacity. They argued that List was suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service, combined with an undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive personality disorder.
Are they arguing he was legally insane and did not know right from wrong? Because the law is usually very strict about what constitutes insanity.
They were trying to thread a very difficult legal needle. They argued his mental state was so deteriorated by financial stress and religious obsession that he lacked the capacity to premeditate the murders. The defense brought in expert psychiatrists who testified that List was experiencing a psychological break. They argued his religious delusion was so absolute that he truly believed he was performing an act of love to save his children from a sinful world.
But how does a jury reconcile a psychological break with a man who carefully stopped the mail, cashed in savings bonds, and made himself lunch between murders? That sounds like cold calculation, not a sudden break.
That was the exact argument the prosecution made. The state countered the psychological defense with the timeline. Prosecutors walked the jury through November 9th, hour by hour. They highlighted the immense patience required to wait for each child to come home. They pointed to the letter he wrote to his pastor, which demonstrated clear, organized thought. They emphasized the meticulous cleanup and his 18-year evasion of justice.
So the prosecution argued that his religious justification was just an excuse for a man who was too proud to admit he had failed as a provider.
Yes. The state argued that John List was a narcissist. Rather than face the humiliation of welfare, eviction, and his wife's deteriorating health, he chose to wipe his slate clean. The prosecution told the jury that List knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong, which is why he fled. The jury had to decide if List's rigid religious logic legally mitigated his actions, or if it was simply the calculated motive of an arrogant killer.
If they accept the diminished capacity argument, he avoids a first-degree murder conviction. What did the jury decide?
The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They rejected the defense's theory of diminished capacity entirely. John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, the judge told List that his name would forever be synonymous with an act of unfathomable selfishness. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Did he ever show remorse during his time in prison? Or did he maintain that he did the right thing?
In later interviews, List expressed regret, but he continued to insist that at the time, he genuinely believed he was sending his family to heaven. He died in prison in 2008 at the age of 82. The Breeze Knoll property remained an empty lot for years before a new house was finally built. But the legacy of the case remains a dark study in the dangers of absolute, rigid perfectionism. John List destroyed 5 lives, not in a sudden fit of rage, but quietly, methodically, to protect an image that was already gone.
It is terrifying to think that the most dangerous person to that family was the one sitting at the head of the dinner table, quietly deciding their fate.
If this case left you questioning the psychology of the crime or the court's interpretation of diminished capacity, subscribe for more careful investigations into true crime history.
And tell us in the comments what you believe was the true motive here. Was it entirely driven by his twisted religious logic? Or was it just the pride of a man who refused to admit failure?
If this episode was worth your time, a like helps support the channel and keeps these stories in front of people who still want answers.
Stay safe and keep questioning everything.